When you deliver pizzas for a living, you collect stories. Most of them are small, funny things: the guy who answers the door in a full suit of armor, the college kids who try to pay you with a half-eaten bag of chips. You become a fleeting character in 100 different lives every night. But you also learn that the line between a normal night and a story you'll never be able to forget is dangerously thin. For me, that line was erased on a dead-end street called Blackwood Road. I was working for Tony's Slice of Heaven back in my college days. It was a classic old-school joint. The job was simple: drive, deliver, repeat. Most of the time, the biggest danger was hitting a pothole and jostling the toppings. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night, oppressively slow. The rain had been drizzling for hours and the whole town felt empty. It was just me and Tony, the owner, watching the clock tick towards midnight. We were about to call it a night when one last order lit up the screen. 2 large pepperonis, a liter of Coke. The address was 1414 Blackwood Road, the absolute fringe of our delivery area. Tony grumbled about the gas money, but an order was an order. I'd never been down Blackwood. All I knew was that it branched off the main highway and snaked deep into the State Forest Preserve. People said it was where old families lived, the ones who didn't like neighbors. The drive started normally, but the farther I went, the more disconnected I felt. Streetlights became sparse, then vanished altogether. The smooth asphalt of the highway degraded into cracked, uneven road, and finally, my tires were crunching over loose gravel. My cell service had dropped to a single bar, then blinked out completely. The forest on either side was a solid wall of black, so dense that my headlights couldn't penetrate it. It felt like driving into a tunnel with no end. My GPS, a clunky old Garmin, finally chirped, "You have arrived." I pulled over and killed the engine. The silence was absolute, save for the ticking of my cooling engine. The house at 1414 Blackwood was a monster, a 2-story colonial wreck, sagging in the middle like its spine had been broken. The paint was just a memory, the wood beneath weathered to a skeletal gray. Every window on the first floor was boarded up, and the ones on the second were black, vacant eyes. No lights, no cars, not even a mailbox. It was a derelict, a hollowed-out corpse of a house. This had to be a prank, I sighed, picturing the lecture from Tony. I pulled out my phone. No service. Of course. I called the number from the order slip anyway. A single tinny ring, then a robotic voice. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." Okay, that's it. I'm out. Every instinct told me to put the car in reverse and burn rubber all the way back to town. But then I saw it. A faint, flickering light in one of the upstairs windows. A candle, maybe. Someone was home. I convinced myself it was just some harmless eccentric, maybe an elderly recluse who didn't trust banks or cell phones. I grabbed the pizzas, their warmth a flimsy shield against the oppressive cold of the place, and walked up the shattered concrete path. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. I reached the porch, which groaned in protest under my feet, and knocked on the heavy oak door. The sound was swallowed by the house, leaving only silence. I waited, counting to 30. I was turning to leave when a voice drifted from inside, thin and dry as autumn leaves. "It's open. Just come in." My blood went cold. Company policy was an iron wall. You never, ever go inside. "I can just leave it right here on the porch for you, ma'am," I shouted, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. There was a pause. Then the voice came again, laced with a strange, wheezing desperation. No, please. The money's on the table. It's for my family. They've been waiting all day." Against my better judgment, The image of a frail old woman struggling to get to the door won out. My empathy was a fatal flaw. I took a deep breath, turned the cold, tarnished doorknob, and pushed. The door swung open on a long, agonizing creak, revealing a cavern of absolute darkness. The smell was overwhelming now, that sweet, cloying odor of rot mixed with something else, something metallic. As my eyes adjusted, I saw him, a silhouette in a high-backed armchair, so skeletal he seemed to be made of shadow and bone. "Hello," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Pizza delivery?" "Wonderful," he hissed, his voice like sand and gravel. "On the table. The family is so hungry." I took a hesitant step inside. The floor was covered in a fine layer of something that crunched under my boots. I glanced down. In the dim light filtering through the grimy fan light above the door, I saw it wasn't dirt. It was dust, leaves, and something else. Tiny, pale shards. Bone. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I practically threw the pizzas onto a low table where I saw a few crumpled bills. "It's $24.50, I stammered, not even looking at the money. "Keep the change, son. Your generosity will be remembered. But don't rush off. Stay and meet them. They do so love company." "I really can't," I said, already backing towards the freedom of the open door. "My boss." "He can wait. They can't." And that's when I heard it. A sound from the floor above. A slow, deliberate scrape. 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 It was the sound of something heavy, something boneless being dragged across bare floorboards. It was followed by a low, wet, gurgling sigh. The old man's head swiveled with an unnatural speed towards the staircase. A grin stretched his thin lips, a black slash in his pale face. "Ah," he breathed, a sound of pure satisfaction. "They're awake." That was it. I was done. I turned and lunged for the door, but a hand shot out and clamped onto my wrist. It was the old man. He had crossed the room in total silence, and his grip was like iron, cold, unyielding, and terrifyingly strong. "The meal has been served. You will not leave them hungry." Adrenaline exploded in my chest. I ripped my arm free with a strength I didn't know I had, shoving him with all my might. He went down with a brittle crackle, like a pile of dry twigs. I didn't look back. I burst out onto the porch and sprinted, blind with terror. I threw myself into my car, the engine screaming to life. As I peeled out, spinning gravel, my headlights swept across the front of the house one final heart-stopping time. The upstairs window was no longer empty. Two figures stood there, impossibly tall and thin, their faces pale, featureless, ovals in the darkness. And on the porch, where the old man had fallen, 3 more were emerging from the open doorway. They didn't walk, they flowed, their long, emaciated limbs moving in a jerky, unnatural way. They stood there, motionless, a silent, starving audience, watching me flee. I quit that night. I never told Tony the real story. Some things you can't explain because explaining them makes them real. I just know that somewhere, deep in the woods at the end of Blackwood Road, a house sits in the dark, and a family is still waiting. After that incident out on Blackwood Road, I needed a change. I moved to a different city and got a job at one of those big corporate pizza chains. It was sterile, predictable, and blessedly boring. The delivery zone was a massive suburb, a perfect grid of manicured lawns and identical houses that backed onto a sprawling national park. It was the borderlands. where the neat and tidy world of cul-de-sacs met something much older and wilder. And it was on that border that I met Silas. The order was always the same. One small cheese pizza, no drink, delivered to the last house on Sparrow Creek Lane. The house was a stark A-frame, all dark wood and huge panes of glass that reflected the dense woods behind it like black mirrors. The name was Silas, and he was a ghost. He never opened the door more than a crack. A pale, long-fingered hand would emerge, slip the exact cash into my hand, and take the pizza. Never a word, never a face. I delivered to him a dozen times over a few months. Each time an unsettling feeling crept over me. The woods behind his house felt different. They were thicker, darker, and quieter than anywhere else. And there were the symbols. Hanging from the low-slung branches of the pines at his property line were these intricate, disturbing little effigies made of woven sticks, twine, and what looked like bird feathers. They weren't dream catchers. They felt ancient, territorial, like a warning. Then came the storm in October. It wasn't just rain. It was a full-on assault. The wind screamed, and the power grid for our whole sector failed. The world went dark. We were shutting down the store when a call came through, somehow rerouted to our emergency cell. One small cheese pizza for Silas. He was offering a $50 tip to any driver brave enough to try. $50 was more than beer money. It was rent money. I was the only one stupid enough to say yes. The drive was treacherous. It was like navigating an obstacle course of fallen branches and overflowing storm drains. When I finally reached Sparrow Creek Lane, it was a black river. The streetlights were dead. The only illumination was from the violent flashes of lightning that split the sky, briefly turning the world into a stark, negative image. My progress came to a jarring halt about 200 feet from Silas's house. A massive pine tree, a giant of the forest, had been torn from the earth and lay across the road, its roots exposed and clawing at the night sky. There was no way around it. I sat in my car, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof. The smart thing to do was to go back, but that $50 felt like a lifeline. It's just a short walk, I told myself. I threw on a cheap poncho, clutched the pizza box to my chest like a life raft, and stepped out into the tempest. The wind tried to rip the box away, but I held on, my head down, and trudged through the muddy grass. As I got closer, I saw a flicker of light from inside the house. Not just one flicker, but many. Dozens of candles, their flames dancing and casting long, writhing shadows across the big glass windows. A strange sense of foreboding washed over me. This wasn't just some weirdo. This was a cult, and I was their pizza guy. I had to leave, now. I started backing away, silent as a ghost, placing each foot carefully. But in my haste, my heel came down squarely on a waterlogged twig. Crack. The sound, though small, was like a thunderclap. The inside chanting stopped. A dead, heavy silence filled the air, more terrifying than the noise it replaced. I bolted. Behind me, I heard the heavy front door swing open, a deep, resonant voice, a voice that seemed to shake the very porch boards, called out into the storm. It wasn't angry. It was triumphant. "The offering has arrived." I didn't look back. I crashed through the underbrush, thorns and branches tearing at my poncho and skin. I could hear them coming after me, not running, but moving through the woods with an eerie confidence, their guttural calls echoing through the trees. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the bobbing lights of several lanterns spreading out, trying to cut me off. I scrambled over the fallen pine, my breath coming in ragged sobs, and sprinted for the dark shape of my car. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, scooped them from the mud, and finally got the door open. The engine turned over on the second try, and as I slammed the car into reverse, the beams of my headlights cut across the road. A single, robed figure stood there, at the edge of the woods, perfectly still, its head tilted as if in curiosity. It made no move to stop me. It just watched. I drove like a madman back to town. The $50 tip was forgotten. The next morning, I found a small stick-and-twine symbol tucked neatly under my windshield wiper. A souvenir. A promise. I put in my 2 weeks' notice that day, and I moved to a city with no old forests and no strange houses at the end of unlit lanes. But every time a storm rolls in, I can't help but look out my window, half expecting to see a flickering candle in the darkness. In the early 2000s, I delivered pizzas in a city that was a patchwork of invisible borders. I worked for a small, independent shop in the territory of a gang called the Kings. Our delivery radius, unfortunately, bled right into the turf of their sworn enemies, the Vipers. Driving my beat-up '92 Civic across those lines always felt like crossing a checkpoint in a war zone. My car was my camouflage, a piece of junk nobody would look at twice. The job was about speed, anonymity, and never carrying more than $20 in your pocket. One Friday night, an order came in that made my stomach clench. It was for the Citadel, a grim, concrete tower block that was the unofficial headquarters of the Vipers. The name on the order was just T. Everyone knew T. He was a Viper lieutenant, and ordering from a shop on King's turf was either incredibly stupid or a deliberate sign of disrespect. My manager didn't care about gang politics. He cared about the $30 order. I was the one who had to drive it there. The air felt heavy as soon as I crossed Canterbury Avenue, the invisible line. The graffiti changed from the King's gold crowns to the Viper's coiled snakes. The guys on the street corners watched me pass, their eyes lingering on my car's faded Pizza Town logo. I was an outsider, a potential threat. A few blocks from the Citadel, I noticed it in my rearview mirror. A black SUV, the kind with windows so tinted you couldn't see inside. It had been behind me for a while, keeping a steady distance. I took a left onto a side street I knew was a dead end, hoping to shake it. The SUV turned with me. My paranoia cranked up to 11. This wasn't a coincidence. I pulled up in front of the Citadel, its entrance a dark mouth gaping at me. I killed the engine, my hands slick with sweat. Before I could even get out, the black SUV swerved and screeched to a halt right behind me, perfectly blocking my escape. My heart seized. Two men emerged. They were big, dressed in the King's colors, and the one leading the way had a spiderweb tattoo crawling from his collar up his neck. They moved with the cold efficiency of predators. I was caught, pinned down in the heart of enemy territory by my own side's enforcers. "You the new delivery boy for tea?" the tattooed one growled, his eyes scanning the building behind me. I held up the pizza box, my voice tight. "Man, I'm just from Pizza Town. Got a double sausage for apartment 4B. The second guy let out a short, humorless laugh. "Pizza Town. That's his new brand. Clever." They thought I was a courier, a drug mule using a pizza delivery as a front. My crappy car, my uniform, it was the perfect cover. I was about to protest, to plead my innocence, when the tattooed king closed the distance between us. He slammed a hand on the hood of my car, leaning into my personal space. "We don't care who you are, pizza guy, but you work for T now, and you're gonna deliver a message for us." He grabbed me by the front of my shirt, his knuckles digging into my chest, and started dragging me towards their SUV. I don't work for him," I gasped, but it was like talking to a brick wall. The other king opened the trunk. For a split second, I thought they were going to throw me in. The reality was so much worse. Inside was a man. He was bound with zip ties, a dirty rag stuffed in his mouth. His face was a pulp of bruises and blood, but I could still make out the viper tattoo on his cheek. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine. He was alive, and they were their message. "You're gonna go up to 4B, the tattooed king explained, his voice chillingly calm. "You're gonna give T his pizza, and then you're gonna tell him to come down to the lobby. You tell him the kings have his cousin, and we want to talk business. You tell him if he calls the cops, his cousin loses his teeth, then his fingers. You got it?" My mind went blank with fear. This wasn't just a threat. It was a negotiation, and I was the unwilling diplomat. If I went up there, the vipers would see me as a traitor. They'd kill me for leading the kings to them. If I refused, the kings would kill me right here on the street. There was no way out. I was a dead man. As I stood there, paralyzed by the impossible choice, I saw it. A flicker of blue and red light reflecting off a distant window. A police cruiser, making its slow, methodical patrol 2 blocks down. It was moving away from us, but it was there. It was a 1-in-a-million shot. A desperate plan, born of pure terror, formed in my mind. I took a shaky breath, looked the tattooed king in the eye, and nodded. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll deliver your message." Relief, or maybe just arrogance, flickered across his face. He loosened his grip slightly. It was the only opening I'd get. With a surge of adrenaline, I pivoted and shoved the steaming pizza box with all my strength into his face. He bellowed in a mix of pain and shock as molten cheese and hot sauce seared his skin. The second king was momentarily frozen, his brain trying to process what was happening. I didn't hesitate. I filled my lungs and screamed, a raw, primal sound that ripped from my throat. "Cops! Police! Right here! He's got a gun!" I pointed wildly down the street in the vague direction of the cruiser. That was the magic word. The king's head snapped around. They saw the distant flashing lights. Panic replaced their cold confidence. They scrambled, shoving their captive deeper into the trunk and slamming it shut. I didn't watch them leave. I ran. I abandoned my car, the delivery, my job, everything. I sprinted in the opposite direction, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. I heard the roar of the SUV's engine as it peeled out, tires screaming as it fled the scene. I ducked behind a dumpster in a dark alley, my body shaking uncontrollably. I watched as the police cruiser, now with its siren wailing, sped past in hot pursuit. I stayed there for almost an hour, listening to the city's heartbeat return to its normal rhythm. I was alive. Stranded, jobless, and terrified, but alive. I eventually walked the 5 miles back to the shop, gave my boss a lie about being carjacked, and told him I was done. The cops found my car and called me a few days later. The kings had gotten away. I couldn't give them a positive ID. It was just another night of violence in a city full of it. They told me I was lucky, that I'd stumbled into a war and somehow walked out without a scratch. They were right, but sometimes I think about that guy in the trunk, and I wonder if my message, that desperate, chaotic scream for help, ever got delivered. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. Thanks so much, friends. and I'll see you again soon.